I'm working on the Irish Research Council Fellow between Trinity and the Irish Museum of Modern Art. And Lynne has been very gracious to invite me down to talk about her work today.
Well, some of you might recognise some of the things that are here already, and that doesn't matter because I travel under the name of the Amuseoleum. So, like all museums, when I visit them time and time again, you see old favourites and there might be new things. And I reckon museums are things that, well, from my point of view, but obviously there's different slants on this, but museums encapsulate something of the era in which they were created, and they don't need to be updated. I think they ought to become a museum of museums, or a museum, well anyway, you know what I mean, kept as they were and not fiddled around with. If they need the things that are in them, take some out and then put them in a context with all the new gadgetry that's available. But I think to keep, from the point of view of history and examining things as they were created, I mean it's sad if they get changed, because I think there's museums that I'd really like to visit again and see things that I was very fond of in my youth. I bet they're not there anymore.
No. Yeah, because that's what happens with like trends, especially like, you know, at different museums. I know like, you know, at the Guggenheim and also, you know, here at IMMA, you know, there are different things that happen in different periods. Like, you know, so things that you'd be used to, all of a sudden they get archived and they get taken out or taken away.
It's still in existence but not available to see.
Exactly, and that's a shame. Yeah, that's a shame without, you know, the way that we audit it, you know, in some particular way. And I think that's why your art is important, because I think that, you know, it's based, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that your art is based in nature. I mean, that it's found art in a particular way, when, you know, by you journeying through the landscape and finding particular bits.
That would very much be a man-made product as well, but they're presented in a slightly different way.
Do you want to talk about, like, you know, how the environment changes? Like, I think that, you know, when we were talking about, you know, rubbish in a particular way.
Yeah, well, it's a question of just going out, and because I'm always going outside, walking the dog or picking up rubbish. Anybody might think I'm fanatical about it, but I know the rubbish that I come across, if I don't pick it up, I'll just see it getting older and older, and if it's a Coke can, it will get more and more squashed, or if it's paper, it will readily disappear. But then the hedge trimmers come along and mince everything up and makes it even more confusing. But yeah, it's only by looking at things you notice if they change or not. Likewise, my adaptation of a piece of beechwood into a pareidolia of some physiotomy, the left-hand side stained with walnut juice, which is really handy because I don't have to go and get a can of paint, and paint is, generally speaking, highly processed, man-made stuff, isn't it? So I'm deciding to abandon paint altogether. I just don't pick up things that are black and brown and green as and when I need it, but I might only be joking.
But no, but I think that's an interesting idea, so that, you know, that you walk away from painting to, you know, to things that are found in the environment. And it's not only, you know, I think that, you know, with the idea of the things that are found, the idea that, you know, they might be thrown away goods, but they have like a color resonance that you can see, or the texture of it.
Oh yeah.
You know, I think that, you know, we were talking earlier about the idea of the evocative, and also the idea of the provocative. And I think that it's important to kind of like lay those terms out, because I don't think necessarily your art is provocative. I think that you want to use this idea of the Amuseoleum to kind of like evoke feeling or particularly kind of awareness in people.
Or recognition, because people might not think of some physiotomy except for anything terribly appalling, which it is.
Do we all know what that term is?
It's like magic, finding a piece of timber that reminded me of it, you see. So everything seems to, if you think about it the right way, have a further purpose.
That's right.
If you want it to have, of course, or it's just so painfully obvious you can't avoid it.
And I think that the pareidolia here is that you actually see the wood itself, and you see the cervix. You can actually see the cervix, but only if you look for it. And it's something that's there but not there. But I think this idea of pareidolia is really, really interesting when it comes to the work with the bells here.
And there wouldn't be a tradition in Ireland of bells, which is a bit sad because I'm becoming a bit fanatical about bells. That would be an English sheep bell, and they were lappets, and they were mounted on a little wooden yoke. Quite often, a fork of yew was used and attached with little leather thongs and pegs of wood. And that one would have had a transfer on the back of a bouquet of flowers with a little ribbon underneath of what town or country it came from, but that's fallen off. So on this side, I decided to. I was getting, I'm not taking any ball machine in the gigs, but I was flicking through a book about Canterbury Cathedral, and there was this wondrous figure on the north wall outside and somewhere way up, and I painted that from it. And then I was talking about pareidolia at the Black Mill, and two women that were looking around, and she said, well, that's pareidolia, there's three figures there. So what do you mean three figures? And she said, well, there's a figure kneeling there, and a figure kneeling there, and then there's the complete figure, so I have to agree, you can't disagree with that. No. So, that's pareidolia for
That's
you.
a really good example of it, you know.
Right.
And I think that, you know, what's interesting about your work is too, it's this idea that you're finding things, but there is almost, if you want to see it, and maybe this isn't the way that you see it, but there's a bit of politics around this ecclesiology, and also about, you know, the environment as well. You know, what we are doing to the environment as we pass through it. And what I'm trying to get at is, like, you know, we'll start with the ash tree and the hurleys and, you know, the ash dieback, but how you've connected that with the whirligigs on the pea green boat, you know.
Yeah, it's a bit like propellers that don't work anymore.
Yes.
With these boats out in the Mediterranean and elsewhere around the world that are failing to do their job properly.
Exactly.
Because they've been overloaded.
Yeah. But I, you know, what's interesting to me about that is that we've placed toys in the boats, you know, children's toys. And, you know, we've had this conversation about why parents give children toys. You know, what do they do? Why are they giving these toys, and what do those toys then mean? You know, so.
Yes, and what do they mean? Because they end up in charity shops. They're not treasured or wanted or considered something that somebody wants to keep. Unlike next door in the panels of descriptions of Hannah Hawkswell's dolls when she was little, they were handmade and they were her precious treasures. And none of that out there is a precious treasure, and it would never become a precious treasure. And the sea, well, I've said this before, the sea being clogged up with plastic, it's getting clogged up with things that are made that nobody actually really wants anyway.
Yes. And I, you know, I like this idea that you're talking about treasures and what is valuable and what isn't. Because, you know, when we reference, like you've done, the Mediterranean, you know, I get that image of, you know, that little Greek baby that the Turkish baby who washed up on the shores of Greece. Yeah. You know, so you have, you know, what does it mean to be an immigrant? What does it mean to be valued? What does it mean to be treasured in a particular way? And so I think that, you know, an Amuseoleum is an interesting concept because it's approachable. You know, it's not meant to be provocative, but it's meant to be approachable in a particular way where maybe you can think tangentially about an issue, but, you know, in a way that it's comprehensible for you to, or a viewer of the art to handle or to manage, you know, to think about what is valuable and what isn't. And then this boat, you know, this owl with the pussycat on the pea green sea, you know, with their honey wrapped in a, you know, a 5-pound note.
Yes, going off to see the yoke, because I mean, well, I've said it before, and it's probably silly, and it's a bit of a broad sweeping statement if you're talking about inventions, right? Because we get into religious area here, which I'm not really interested in, but about human beings, about the worst possible thing that was ever invented.
Yes.
That's it, can't say any more than that. That's all it boils down to, really. Now, what sensible place the world would be if it was left to animals. Except
it's sad, but in the way that, like, your art wants to approach it. It's sad, but it's also evocative. It's evocative of sadness, it's evocative of contemplation, and it's evocative of other things that, when you come to maybe this Amuseoleum. For example, I'm thinking about this figure right here with the Irish cottage industries. You have this mannequin with a hat on.
Yeah.
And what looks like, 1960s dress for a woman. That, maybe that she would have worn it, when she was pregnant or.
Right done.
Yeah. But my attention is drawn to the quality of the garment.
It's interesting you should say that, because people that have remarked on that, during the few days that I was actually here, there was two women older than myself that said, look at the quality, look at the cut, that's really 1960s, and they were getting very excited about it.
Yes.
I thought that was strange, and then 4 men came in, and they were equally interested.
There is that element of gender there, and gender dysphoria, and so in the Amuseoleum.
It's all this talk, isn't it, today, that school children are introduced to the fact that they might not be boys and girls afterwards and better go home and do a bit of homework. They might want to be something else.
But I think that what your art does is opens the opportunity for that conversation to happen once again, whether it's valuable or what is actually happening, but it is happening, and so I think that your art opens the space for that.
Why that is on a male, that suit is on a male figure is because female blinking mannequins are ridiculous proportions. Blinking stiletto heels, and it's bizarre, and that sort of dress does not hang on these ridiculous figures.
With it,
Much more appropriate on that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it's like when you look around though, and I think for me, in my opinion, I think that humans are kind of pattern seekers. So we're looking to see how your art connects to itself. How it holds itself together in a particular way. Do you have any insights in how we could think about that, or as we're going through the exhibition to look at your art? What would you say? Would you want to talk about the cards here and point people to the cards to say that they're kind of like?
Say something about the cards. Well, you can read. And you can choose not to read, but other people might be very, very happy to read those things. Those postcards give hints, clues and facts about most of the stuff on display. And
is that where the colours from the little twigs with the colours on it underneath the ash tree, is that where they came from?
But when all said and done, all these various twigs I've got at home, all drying out, all labelled up of what they came from, once they reach the dried bit, they don't really resemble anything but an example of everybody that, all these little twigs that are there. So it's a bit like humanity. Initially they might look different, but the base is there. Once you dry them out, they're all exactly the same.
Exactly. That makes me think of Miss and Master Fog. It's this idea that, there's this desiccated thing, but also that if it gets enough water, there's seeds there, and it would come to life again. And so you have these kind of abandoned objects, but you also have these things that may give life again because they're seeded as well.
Yeah.
And so it's that mix as well. I mean, it's this idea of found things that may be detritus, may or may not be in a particular way. But it's also these desiccated pieces of plants with the seeds still embedded in them that that regenerate or give life, and then the whole object looks different. The whole artwork looks different when that happens. Another connection to Britain is the lifting of the shirt. The shirt lifting exhibit here with the linen.
Oh, the smock thing in the front,
And the lovely smock that you have on here.
This one would be old. It wouldn't be a particularly fancy one. It's cotton drill and it's shaped, sort of coat shaped with buttons up the front, but that would be more of a Midland sort of area rather than the south of England. But smocks, I think, are really the only thing that Britain can really claim to as a form of national costume, because it spans 2 or 3 generations, if not slightly more. Smocks, yes, because they're made out of natural fibres made by wives or cottage industries. And I just find them really, really interesting.
I think that what's interesting what you've done with the smock and the lifting of the skirt.
Oh yeah, upskirting. That's that horrible
yeah.
term that was very popular a few years ago, where presumably adolescent boys went down with their canvas doing this, that and the other, you know, around towns and villages and cities. Most unfortunate. So I did a rising thing where you pull a thing. The mechanism seems to have worn, but when you pull a handle, the front of the smock rises up and you get a view of the seat here and Sheila McGee stitching on her lap, because she's very much sitting with on a sort of tailory sort of position, stitching in outline the Sir Abbas giant, which is renowned for his vast size.
Penis.
Consequently, vast size involves a vast penis, but it is anatomically it's correct. There's nothing particularly big about it. So instead of doing the normal sort of thing, I decided to reproduce his cudgel. Instead of carved into grass, into chalk, he's raised in white, or it's raised in white wool blanket above a green in the background. So it's just, you see, it's what amuses me. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it to please anybody else, I only do it to please myself, so it's very...
No, but I think that's amazing, because in this conjunction of amusement and the art itself, you're getting culture, you're getting what's culturally relevant to Britain, but also the Irish context of the Sheila McGee, the Sheila McGee interacting with the myth itself. That for me, like, you know, I think that what academics do is we kind of make connections sometimes where there aren't. But I think that, you know, why I like being here today and talking to you is because it's this idea of what the artist does and what is your process and how it works. And when you say, you know, otherwise I would be doing something else, but, you know, pardon me for saying this, but I don't think that you would be able to, because it's who you are. I think the art is in you, and if you were doing something else, it would addle you if you weren't doing the art. And I think that, you know, that's the important thing about being an artist and about artist recognition. And the issues, like, even though you touch upon them in your own particular way, and you have your own ideas about them, it leaves space for us as human communities to talk about them. So I think that your artwork is important in that, and your process is important.
Well, since my lifetime, I've always been a collector of things. I find that enchanting, that sort of thing. But I suppose coming to Ireland, well, actually, when I was at school, I was going to go to agricultural college, and then at the 11th hour, I decided art college might be more fun, which it could have been, but I didn't like it when I left. I think, well, I did really, I never had a plan, not a career person. I wouldn't have taken advice from my parents, and I didn't know anybody that I would be interested enough to accept their advice if they were to offer it. So I bought and sell things and did sort of junk fairs and car boot sales exist then. So I was satisfying my collecting instinct and offsetting what I bought to pay for the things that I kept. And then we moved to Ireland, but it wasn't really until getting to Ireland that I started painting, but I think painting really didn't hold my interest, and I thought, look, I must just get back to the essence of what I'm interested in, and that's finding interesting old things or finding things. Then I decided, oh yeah, empty shop windows, I'll ask the owners, could I use your window, please, to put things in? They said, well, what do you do? And I said, I don't really know yet. If I can use it, I'll fill it up with something. They said, will it be for sale? Oh no, it's not a business, it's just a sort of urge I've got to make little scenes in windows. So I did that for a few years and it worked quite well, and I don't think it garnered any attention. There was never any mention of it in any local newspaper, and somebody said, well, you'll never hear if anybody looks in the window unless you put an email address in the window. So I put an email address in the window, and that garnered 2 responses over a period of about 4 years, and then it faded away and got wet. I thought we would replace it. One was from a local person. I should have made sure she was going to be here, and I forgot, and I hope she doesn't find out about this afterwards. But she does live in Birr, And she said, I've been in Cuba. How did you know I'd been in Cuba? You've got all those windows. You've got all those Cuban cigars in that window. And I said, well, actually, that window is about paedophiles. That window is about Jimmy Savile. And it was his cigars. It wasn't really anything to do with you going on holiday at all. But she hadn't studied it carefully enough. I mean, you could be lying naked in the street. Nobody'd notice.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. I think that, like, I think that we're sitting here and we could pretend that we're like, a shop window and we could let them ask us questions. What do you think? Would you like, or would you mind? Or
What, answer questions?
yes, would you mind? Or
I would love to be grilled.
what about grilled lightly?
I was going to say lightly grilled, yeah. Or otherwise. But.
Lynne, I'm curious as to the art that you started first. You did a lot of painting. So what kind of subjects, or if there was a subject, or was it,
Did I paint?
yeah, you said you were...
Oh, it was generally architectural features
Okay.
and ruined buildings,
Okay.
that kind of thing, and nature trees, but not sufficient. I suppose the thing was, I don't know what I was trying to achieve. I was just doing it. There wasn't a specific reason.
Yeah.
And then acrylics, but then, and sort of finity, good quality acrylics. And then I decided that all these tubes, they get a bit hard sometimes, or I don't use them that much, and I just, what a menace. So anyway, the beauty of Dulux tester pots. Okay, and so I decided, fancy paint, not worth it. Just think, how many bits of interior decorating do you do in your house that fades or radically changes by being in a room, perhaps for decades? It doesn't much unless you're a smoker. So this idea that I really sort of got formulated today, and perhaps over the last week or two, that what I really want to do is to make a travelling Amuseoleum, and like a snowball, and travel around to interesting old buildings and pick up new peculiar bits along the way, so it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes. Yeah.
And then
It takes on a life of its own then.
yeah, and then it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
Righty-ho.
Yeah.
Anybody got any bells for sale? Just about.
Lynne, would you talk a little bit more about the pea green boat?
Well,
Because it had
I think you talk about it, because you've done that pea green. This is into boats, but they float off down the river. He's got his eye on that. Those toys could be tied up and act as floats. Buoyancy floats.
It was extraordinary to see it in the Black Mill in Birr. In Roscrea.
It was in the right place.
But you've reconfigured it for this exhibition. Will you talk about that process a little bit, about how you reconfigured it and what it means to you now?
Right. Okay. That boat was made by my husband when we lived in Mullingar. It never went anywhere. It wasn't painted. It was in a shed at home, turned upside down on top of another boat that's never been anywhere. And early last year, I thought, well, I must get it out and do something about that. March was very warm and dry. Reverting to Dulux tester pots on the outside, which that paint goes on beautifully, and you don't have that pongy thing with White Spirit. So then I planned to have toys in it, soft toys, animals inside, with an array of dollies outside. They're not allowed on, it's the animals that are taking precedence. So that was very, very fortunate. We got it in the basement in the Black Mill, and the strange thing about the Black Mill, so in some ways it was very much like going down the dock area and going onto a ship. So that boat at the bottom of the stairs worked quite well. It doesn't really matter, but I thought the only way I can logically display that is upside down, so it doesn't fill up with water and the toys can go on the top. And luckily, I was running out of time on the night of the opening, and Mary, my daughter, who some of you will know, eventually got hadn't known that it was due to open in about 3 hours. She thought it was probably about a week away, and she shot round and hung up all the little dollies underneath, which I never would have gone that far, and it works brilliantly.
Yes, it does.
So that's it. But what happens after this, if anybody would like any soft toys, or you can go back home upside down on the boat that hasn't been to sea or lake for a long time. It needs to go, because it's the sort of boat that would go very well up and down Loch Green.
Yeah, I agree.
I just say that there's something which I think is incredibly attractive
Wait a minute, I'm going to come
Exhibitions
very hard.
about is that it starts with a playful element.
Very much so.
Like everything, there's a certain playful element and sometimes only playful.
Yes.
And then there's a dark element that creeps in, which I think is fascinating. I
Yes.
love that about it.
Well, thank you for being fascinating. Tell me, who spotted the vertebra? How many people have studied the vertebra? If you have.
We were given a hint. They're excellent.